It wasn't the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that truly started the First World War. It was money. A silent war fought long before the first shot was fired, between empires running out of gold and bankers running out of patience. This was not just a war between nations. It was a financial collision between old money and new power, between the fading gold standard and the birth of debt as a weapon. And what most history books won't tell you is that behind the flags, the speeches, and the trenches stood a different kind of general, one who didn't command armies, but currencies. Welcome to the Fiscal Archivist. Today we reveal the hidden financial battle behind World War I, a story of debt, deception, and a global system that still shapes our world today. Before 1914, the world looked stable. Europe was rich, trade was booming. The great powers, Britain, France, Germany, all tied together by the golden thread of the gold standard. Under it, every major currency was backed by gold, a promise that paper money could be exchanged for something real. This system kept inflation low, trade balanced, and trust intact. But that trust was an illusion. Behind the glittering cities and railways, the empires were drowning in debt. Colonial wars, arms races, and industrial expansion had drained treasuries. Britain ruled the seas, but her empire was expensive. France was still paying for its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Germany, new, industrial, ambitious, was rising fast, threatening the old order. Each empire was addicted to growth, and gold couldn't grow as fast as their ambitions. So the great powers began looking for creative finance. In London, the Rothschilds, the Barings, and the Bank of England managed global capital flows. In Paris, the Banque de France served as Europe's other vault of trust. In Berlin, the Reichsbank was trying to prove Germany could finance itself without British approval. But all of them faced the same problem. Gold was finite and credit was infinite. The world was about to find out what happens when paper promises grow faster than the metal behind them. By the early 1900s, finance had become as powerful as armies. Nations could no longer afford to fight wars unless someone paid for them first. And who would that be? Private bankers. They weren't just lending money to governments. They were shaping policy, controlling access to arms, and influencing diplomacy. Take J.P. Morgan and Co's in the United States. They weren't officially part of any empire, but their money reached all of them. The Morgans had financed railroads, steel, and shipping, industries essential for war. By 1914, Morgan's empire had become the financial bridge between Europe and America. And when war came, that bridge would decide who could fight and who couldn't. Meanwhile, in Germany, industrial magnates like Krupp and Thyssen were building the machinery of modern warfare. But they needed credit, long-term loans, not backed by gold, but by the promise of empire. So central banks quietly began doing what they had promised never to do, printing money beyond their gold reserves. The old system, the gold standard, was cracking, and yet no one dared admit it. Because confidence, not gold, was the true foundation of finance. And confidence is always strongest before collapse. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in June 1914, the world didn't erupt in war overnight, but financial markets did. In London, panic spread through the stock exchange. Banks called in loans. Gold reserves vanished as investors fled uncertainty. Within days, the entire global financial system froze. The London Stock Exchange closed, for the first time in its history. Gold shipments stopped. Credit dried up. And here's the truth hidden beneath the headlines. It wasn't nationalism that forced war. It was the collapse of liquidity. Governments couldn't pay their debts. Armies couldn't be mobilized without credit. So central banks did the unthinkable. They suspended the gold standard. Money printing began. Paper currency flooded the markets. The temporary suspension would become permanent for many nations. And with that decision, World War I became the first modern debt-fueled war. As soldiers marched to the front, bankers gathered behind closed doors. And they knew, whoever controlled the flow of credit would control the war. Britain moved first. The Bank of England partnered with J.P. Morgan and Co., making Morgan the official purchasing agent for Britain in the United States. Morgan financed billions in war materials, earning commissions that quietly reshaped American banking power. Meanwhile, Germany was isolated. British naval blockades cut off trade and gold flows, so Berlin turned inward, issuing war bonds to its own citizens. Posters urged ordinary Germans to invest in victory. But those bonds were not backed by victory, they were backed by hope. Every government printed propaganda, every citizen was told they were helping their country. But in truth, they were financing a debt bubble of historic proportions. By 1917, the numbers were staggering. Britain had borrowed over $7 billion and France, nearly $6 billion. Germany, more than $8 billion. The war had turned bankers into generals, and generals into accountants. And across the Atlantic, America was watching and waiting. Before 1914, the United States was a debtor nation. By 1917, it was the largest creditor in the world. The war transformed American finance. J.P. Morgan's syndicate sold British and French bonds to American investors. Every shell, every rifle, every ship paid for with American money. When the U.S. finally entered the war in 1917, it wasn't just to fight Germany. It was to protect its loans. The Allies owed the U.S. over $10 billion. If they lost, those debts would vanish. So, Washington did what London had once done. It turned its central bank, the Federal Reserve, into a war machine. The Fed issued Liberty bonds. It coordinated gold flows. It became the heartbeat of global finance. And when the war ended, the U.S. emerged not just as a victor, but as the new banker of the world. The armistice of 1918 was not peace. It was a balance sheet. Europe was shattered, its infrastructure destroyed, its treasuries empty. Germany was crushed under the weight of reparations, 132 billion gold marks. That wasn't a punishment. It was a trap. Britain and France needed that money to repay their loans to America. But Germany couldn't pay without collapsing. So, they printed more. The result? Hyperinflation. By 1923, a loaf of bread in Berlin cost 200 billion marks. People burned banknotes for heat. Life savings vanished overnight. And from those ashes, a new kind of politics began to rise, built on anger, desperation, and revenge. The world had fought one war to end all wars, but financially, it had only just begun. To stabilize the chaos, the world turned again to finance. The Dawes Plan, 1924, and Young Plan, 1929, restructured German debt, using new loans from American banks to pay off old European loans. It was a Ponzi scheme disguised as peace. Wall Street became Europe's lender of last resort. Billions flowed across the Atlantic until the 1929 crash pulled the plug. When the Great Depression hit, those same nations were left without liquidity. Trade collapsed, banks failed, unemployment soared, and in Germany, a desperate nation turned to anyone who promised to make the pain stop. That man was Adolf Hitler. The rise of fascism was not just political, it was financially engineered by debt, despair, and the failure of global banks to manage the chaos they had created. Now, over a century later, the patterns remain eerily familiar. Before World War I, the world was globalized, interconnected, and confident in perpetual growth. Debt levels were at record highs. Banks were too big to fail. And people believed war between great powers was unthinkable. Sound familiar? Today, total global debt exceeds $315 trillion, nearly 4 times the world's GDP. Nations are once again printing money to sustain unsustainable promises. Central banks are manipulating interest rates, inflating asset bubbles, and quietly eroding currencies. And once again, the same illusion holds, that paper promises can defy gravity forever. But history whispers a warning. When empires overextend financially, conflict follows. When currencies lose credibility, chaos steps in. The First World War wasn't just a military disaster. It was the death of the old financial order. And perhaps the beginning of the one we live in today. 3 timeless lessons emerge from this hidden battle. Lesson 1. Money is never neutral. Behind every political crisis lies a financial one, unseen but decisive. Lesson 2. Debt is power until it becomes a chain. Empires rise on borrowed time and fall when the bill comes due. Lesson 3. History doesn't repeat. It compounds. Every financial system built on illusion eventually meets its reckoning. The men who financed World War I believed they could control history through money. They were wrong. Their wealth survived, but millions did not. And if we're not careful, we may be watching the sequel unfold. The story of World War I isn't just about trenches and treaties. It's about what happens when the pursuit of profit collides with the limits of gold, credit, and human greed. And somewhere, deep within today's financial system, the same forces still move, quietly, powerfully, unseen. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to the Fiscal Archivist, where we expose the financial truths history tried to bury.